Prince William cuts all ties after DNA test results reveal his true paternity. King Charles is not the father.
A sealed envelope, a secret DNA test, and a revelation that shakes the very foundation of the British monarchy. For centuries, the crown has rested on the weight of bloodlines, of birthrights passed down from generation to generation with ceremonial certainty. But in a stunning twist that has silenced palace halls and ignited a storm of public outcry, that ancient foundation may have just cracked. Hidden away from the public eye, beneath the polished veneer of royal stability, whispers had long haunted the halls of Buckingham Palace. Whispers that grew louder, more insistent, until finally, a truth too explosive to remain buried emerged from the shadows. Prince William, once the golden child of the monarchy, the unshakable heir, the embodiment of Diana's warmth and Charles's lineage, received something no prince expects: scientific proof that shattered the only truth he'd ever known. The results were cold, indisputable. King Charles III, the man who had raised him, guided him, groomed him for kingship, was not his biological father. In an instant, everything that had defined his destiny collapsed into doubt. There was no confrontation, no grand reveal, just silence, and then the echo of a decision that would send tremors through the monarchy. Prince William cut all ties. His choice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Behind closed doors, royal aides scrambled to contain the fallout. News began to leak, first as whispers, then as headlines. What started as palace gossip erupted into a full-blown media frenzy. Journalists circled like vultures. Every past photo, every awkward glance between Charles and William, every quote was dissected and reinterpreted. The public, once comforted by the image of a tight-knit royal lineage, was stunned. Outrage, curiosity, betrayal. Questions thundered louder than answers. Who was the real father? Had the palace always known? And above all, what does this mean for the crown? The implications rippled outward like shockwaves. The royal family, built on the myth of continuity and unbroken lineage, was suddenly exposed as vulnerable, human, and deeply fractured. Legal scholars speculated about succession rights. Royal commentators debated if the monarchy could even survive such a rupture. And yet, as institutions trembled and commentators argued, the man at the heart of the storm said nothing. Prince William remained silent, refusing to play his part in the spectacle. But it was his silence that screamed the loudest. The heir had walked away, and the crown trembled in his absence. But to truly grasp the depth of this unraveling understand the full weight of what's been lost, we must journey back to the beginning, to the night when the world welcomed a prince, and unknowingly embraced a secret that would one day threaten to bring the House of Windsor to its knees. June 21st, 1982, the world watched with bated breath as the gates of Buckingham Palace shimmered under the flashbulbs of 1,000 cameras. At exactly 9:03 p.m., the future of the British monarchy took its first breath. William Arthur Philip Lewis wasn't just any child, he was the heir, the embodiment of tradition, duty, and an entire nation's hopes for a stable future. Crowds gathered outside St. Mary's Hospital, and when the golden easel was placed at the palace gates declaring his arrival, a wave of joy swept across Britain. But even in that moment of celebration, something deeper stirred, something few could see, and fewer dared to question. Unlike royal births of the past, which unfolded behind the private walls of palaces, William's arrival marked a subtle rebellion. Born in a hospital, in the presence of his father, a decision that signaled a monarchy trying to evolve with the times. His birth represented more than tradition. It was a quiet revolution wrapped in a white blanket. The next morning, the world watched as Diana, barely 20, radiant yet clearly overwhelmed, stood beside Prince Charles on the steps of the Lindo Wing, cradling her firstborn. The press heralded it as the picture of modern monarchy: young love, new life, and a promise of progress. But even then, Diana's smile concealed something far more complex. The public fell in love instantly. William was not just a royal infant, he became a symbol, a bridge between the ancient institution and the contemporary world. And Diana, determined to raise him differently, began shattering centuries of royal protocol. She took him to amusement parks, let him ride buses, insisted he understand life beyond the palace gates. To the public, the young family seemed perfect, poised, elegant, and united. But the photos they adored were just that. Still images, frozen in time, hiding the cracks that were already beginning to form beneath the surface. Inside the palace, Prince William's childhood was carefully choreographed, but never entirely conventional. Diana wanted her son to be a man of the people, not just a figure on a coin. Her influence shaped his character. Compassionate, approachable, aware. Yet, behind her efforts to give him a normal childhood, a storm brewed in her marriage. Her smiles in public, though genuine for her children, masked a growing pain. And young William, perceptive beyond his years, saw more than the world realized. He witnessed the tension, the quiet tears, the long silences between his parents. And though he didn't understand it all, he felt its weight. As the nation rejoiced in the image of a perfect royal family, the truth inside the palace walls grew darker. William was adored by the public and groomed for greatness, but he was also growing up in the eye of a storm no child should have to weather. And while the public celebrated birthdays and photo ops, the truth behind his parents' relationship was already slipping through the cracks. Diana's fairy tale had begun to shatter, and with it, the carefully curated world surrounding the little prince. However, beneath the surface, the royal marriage faced challenges that would later fuel speculation. And those silent fractures would soon begin to echo in the unlikeliest of ways, through a question that would shake the monarchy to its core. Who is Prince William's real father? Behind palace doors, whispers of infidelity and betrayal began to surface, casting shadows over the royal lineage. What had once appeared to be a fairy tale union, Prince Charles and Princess Diana, the heir and his young bride, was quietly unraveling beneath layers of public spectacle and private discontent. The world saw the wedding of the century, the iconic images, the warm smiles. But inside the cold corridors of Buckingham Palace, a rift was growing, one that would eventually explode into a crisis of identity, legitimacy, and power. This wasn't just a broken marriage. It was the slow, painful disintegration of the very illusion the monarchy had worked so hard to preserve. From the early days of their marriage, Charles and Diana struggled to find peace. He was bound to royal duty, stiff with tradition and distant with emotion. She, young and emotionally raw, craved affection and authenticity. Their incompatibility was no secret to those closest to them. But as time passed, the disconnect grew wider, and outside relationships began to fill the void. Charles's closeness with Camilla Parker Bowles was more than just a friendship. It was a deep, enduring bond that predated Diana and never truly ended. Their secret meetings, cryptic phone calls, and lingering glances all fueled speculation long before anything was confirmed. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a deliberate erosion of trust, played out behind the grandeur of the crown. And Diana, isolated, heartbroken, and painfully aware of her husband's emotional absence, sought comfort elsewhere. That's where James Hewitt enters the picture. A charismatic cavalry officer, he reportedly offered Diana the warmth and attention she so desperately lacked. Though he would later insist their affair began after Prince William's birth, the public wasn't convinced. The timeline was too close, the resemblance too striking. And as media outlets began digging, the narrative began to shift. It was no longer just about a failing royal marriage. It was about a potentially explosive secret one that could upend the line of succession. Tabloids pounced on the rumor like lions on a wounded gazelle. Every image of Hewitt and Diana was magnified, analyzed, dissected. Every interview, every vague denial only poured fuel on the fire. And in the chaos, one question screamed louder than the rest. Could Prince Charles have raised a child that wasn't his? And if so, had the palace known all along? The idea wasn't just scandalous, it was destabilizing. For a monarchy built on bloodlines, even the suggestion of illegitimacy was a direct threat to its very foundation. The public, once entranced by the romance of the royal family, began to turn. Some saw Diana as a victim, Others saw her as reckless. But all eyes were on William and Harry, two boys caught in a royal war they never asked for. And while most headlines were content with gossip, a darker curiosity began to form. If William wasn't Charles's son, what would that mean for the future of the monarchy? Who truly held the crown's claim? As the rumors intensified, questions about Prince William's true parentage became more pressing questions that no longer lived only in tabloid columns, but in the private corridors of power, where silence often hides the most devastating truths. A clandestine DNA test, a shocking result, and a prince's quest for the truth. It didn't begin with fireworks. It began with doubt. A quiet, persistent voice that refused to be silenced. For years, Prince William had carried the weight of royalty with grace, dutiful, polished, unwavering. But beneath the uniform and titles, behind the carefully rehearsed smiles, lived a gnawing uncertainty that no public gesture could erase. There were whispers, old rumors that refused to die, speculations that had haunted tabloids for decades. And when silence became unbearable, William made the unthinkable choice. In secret, away from the eyes of the court and the press, he ordered the truth. No one outside the inner circle knew. There were no couriers in royal regalia, no declarations from the palace gates, just a single test, clinical and cold. Blood, a swab, a name written at the top of a form that could change the course of British history. Prince William, desperate not for scandal but for clarity, faced what many in the royal household feared most: the truth behind his bloodline. When the results arrived, they came in an envelope so plain it looked harmless. But the contents were anything but. The test was said to confirm what had long been whispered in shadows. King Charles III was not his biological father. The room didn't erupt. There was no scene, just stillness. Heavy, suffocating stillness. The man who had raised him, who had shaped him for the crown, was biologically a stranger. In that moment, William wasn't a prince. He wasn't an heir. He was just a man unmoored from everything he thought he knew. The betrayal wasn't about lies alone. It was about the foundations of identity, about the burden of being built for a legacy that might not belong to him. Questions swirled faster than answers. Did Charles know? Did Diana? Had the palace conspired to preserve an illusion for the sake of the monarchy? Inside Buckingham Palace, the air thickened with dread. The royal family, infamous for their silence, responded as they always had, with nothing. No confirmation, no denial. Just a calculated calm meant to preserve the institution. But that silence said everything. Because in this case, denial wasn't just dangerous, it was impossible. And while the world outside began to speculate, the institution remained frozen, as if pretending the crisis might somehow dissolve on its own. Yet the world had changed. This wasn't the 1980s. Secrets no longer slept safely behind castle walls. The monarchy's greatest strength, its lineage, was now its most fragile illusion. If William wasn't Charles's son, the entire royal narrative was under threat. The crown wasn't just ornamental. It was symbolic of legitimacy, of inherited power. And with one DNA test, the bloodline that sustained it was called into question. But the most telling response didn't come from a press office or palace official. It came from William himself. In the wake of this revelation, Prince William's actions spoke volumes. Quiet choices that hinted at a storm boiling beneath the surface. Choices that would soon lead him to the edge of the very crown he was born to wear. A prince once destined to be king now distances himself from the very institution he was born into. The weight of centuries of oaths, crowns, and expectations had pressed down on his shoulders for as long as he could remember. But now, with a single revelation, everything Prince William had been taught to uphold felt like a beautiful lie. The DNA test didn't just expose a biological truth, it detonated the myth of royal certainty that had shaped his entire life. And in the quiet, calculated aftermath, William did the unthinkable. He stepped back, not with a televised announcement or royal decree, but with silence, distance, and a slow unraveling of ties that had once seemed indestructible. He stopped, returning calls from the palace. Events he would have once led with polished precision were now attended without him. His hand, once steady at King Charles's side, was gone. And though the public didn't yet have the full story, they felt the shift. Something had broken, and William was no longer willing to pretend. The man groomed to be the bridge between the monarchy's past and future had begun to carve out a new path, one that didn't bow to royal expectation, but instead chased something far more elusive: peace. And for a man whose identity had been dictated since birth, this decision wasn't rebellion. It was survival. Behind closed doors, the emotional toll was relentless. The boy who had once looked up to his father during state ceremonies and formal dinners now saw a stranger behind the crown. Every childhood memory, each whispered bedtime story, each private moment was cast into doubt. Had Charles known the truth all along? Had the palace buried it to preserve the line of succession? William wasn't just questioning his father, he was questioning everything. And in that dizzying storm of confusion, one figure remained unshaken: Catherine, the woman who had stood beside him through public scrutiny, media storms, and the weight of monarchy now became his anchor. She didn't urge him back into duty. She didn't advise him to endure. She simply stood with him, silent and strong, as the world tilted on its axis. But stepping back had consequences. Duties were quietly reassigned. His voice in palace affairs was dimmed. Royal observers noted his absence with concern, and media speculation exploded. Some tabloids labeled it a rift. Others whispered of an abdication in slow motion. And yet, William didn't waver. He wasn't leaving for power. He was leaving for truth. His entire life had been crafted around a future that may no longer be his to inherit. And rather than wear a crown that now felt hollow, he chose to retreat to rebuild himself as a man before returning as a monarch. The public was divided. Some wept for the fairy tale unraveling before their eyes. Others praised his courage. And as the institution scrambled to maintain control, a new kind of fear emerged. Because this wasn't Prince Harry shaking the system from the sidelines. This was the heir, the face of the future, walking away. As Prince William stepped back, the monarchy faced unprecedented challenges. And what came next would test the very survival of the royal bloodline. With its future heir in question, the British monarchy stands at a crossroads. What was once seen as an indestructible institution, fortified by centuries of tradition, bloodlines, and divine right, now trembles under the weight of a single damning revelation. The very essence of monarchy has always relied on one unshakable pillar: legitimate succession. But now, that pillar appears fractured. Prince William, long considered the embodiment of royal continuity, may not be the biological son of King Charles III. And if the blood that runs through his veins isn't royal, then what does that mean for the throne he was born to inherit? The constitutional implications are staggering. Though the monarchy in the United Kingdom is largely symbolic, the laws that govern it are precise. The royal line of succession, rooted in lineage and legitimacy, is not a matter of personal preference. It's enshrined in centuries-old precedent and legal doctrine. If Prince William isn't the biological son of the reigning monarch, some experts argue his claim to the throne could be invalidated altogether. Others insist that legitimacy is determined by recognition, not biology. But the fact that this debate is even happening publicly, loudly, and across legal and political forums marks a seismic shift. Historians and constitutional scholars have begun dissecting every aspect of this unraveling. Discussions once confined to university halls or royal biographies have now erupted across media outlets. Could Parliament be forced to clarify the line of succession? Would King Charles have knowingly protected a lie for the sake of continuity? And if so, how much longer can this silence hold in an era where truth spreads faster than protocol? Each question invites another, and each answer, or lack thereof, chips away at the credibility of an already embattled monarchy. But it isn't just lawyers and historians raising alarms. The public has entered the conversation with a ferocity the royal family hasn't witnessed in decades. Voices that once revered the crown now question its purpose. If the system is built on heritage, and that heritage is now a myth, then what's left? The spectacle? The ceremony? The illusion of control in a world demanding truth? Polls reflect a shift. Younger generations are growing louder in their calls for transparency, relevance, and reform. The older generation, once fiercely loyal, is beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. And behind palace gates, that pressure is mounting. This isn't the first time the monarchy has faced crisis abdications. Affairs, divorces, and scandals have shaken the crown before. But this is different. This isn't about personal choices or tabloid headlines. It's about the core structure of power. If Prince William's bloodline is broken, the entire royal narrative must be rewritten. And the monarchy, once adept at bending without breaking, may finally be at risk of snapping under the truth it tried to bury. Some experts predict a quiet restructuring, others fear a slow-motion collapse. But everyone agrees on one thing. This isn't going away. The monarchy cannot return to business as usual. Not after this. Not when its very survival now hinges on its willingness to confront the past. Amidst the turmoil, Prince William embarks on a personal journey to rediscover his identity, one that could either reshape the crown or bring its entire legacy to the brink of reinvention. Stripped of titles and expectations, Prince William seeks to understand who he truly is. For the first time in his life, he is no longer defined by protocol, lineage, or duty. The silence that followed his quiet departure from royal obligation became something else: space to think, to breathe, to question everything that had once been unquestionable. No longer tethered to an identity shaped by others, William began looking inward. And what he found wasn't a prince trying to reclaim his place, it was a man trying to reclaim his soul. He didn't disappear, but he certainly changed. Instead of polished royal engagements, he was seen lending his time to causes that had always touched him deeply. But now, his involvement came without fanfare. He worked quietly with veterans suffering from trauma. He spent long hours with mental health charities, listening more than speaking. These weren't public relations stunts. These were deeply personal missions. For a man who had lived under the weight of ceremony, this was liberation. The polished speeches gave way to raw, honest conversations. The royal wave was replaced by a firm handshake and a gaze that no longer needed to impress, only to connect. "'Tis cool." Home life, once confined by the pressures of monarchy, became his sanctuary. With Catherine by his side, the couple embraced a kind of life the palace never truly allowed. Long walks with the children, unguarded laughter, bedtime stories without the looming threat of press or appearances. William, once groomed to be king, was now simply a father and, perhaps for the first time, a present one. He poured himself into those moments, realizing that real legacy isn't built in gold-lined halls, but in the eyes of the children who look up to you. Not because they have to, but because they trust you. That trust was something William had begun rebuilding brick by brick. In rare public appearances, there was something unmistakably different about him. He no longer spoke like a man following a script. He spoke like a man who had written one of his own. His words carried weight not because of royal titles, but because they were rooted in lived experience. He acknowledged the pain, the confusion, the search for identity, and instead of dodging the rumors or hiding from the headlines, he met them with quiet dignity, refusing to let them define him. The public noticed. The same people who once saw him as merely the next in line now saw something far more human. Many sympathized with his journey. Others admired his courage to walk away from a crown that no longer represented his truth. But nearly all agreed. This wasn't the same man they thought they knew. Prince William, the polished heir, had faded. In his place stood someone unburdened, someone real. As Prince William charts a new course, the world watches to see what the future holds for him, and the monarchy a future no longer dictated by blood alone, but perhaps, finally, by choice. In the aftermath of revelations and reckonings, the British monarchy faces its most defining moment yet. The facade of unbroken lineage, once its greatest strength, has been shattered. What was once whispered behind closed doors is now dissected on global platforms. The truth about Prince William's paternity, the silent withdrawal from royal life, and the crumbling illusion of a perfectly preserved bloodline have plunged the monarchy into uncharted waters. The palace, long practiced in damage control, can no longer rely on silence or tradition alone. Adaptation is no longer a choice, it is the only way forward. Within the royal household, there is a quiet tension, a recognition that the old ways may no longer suffice. Behind the polished statements and poised public appearances, internal restructuring has already begun. Roles are shifting, responsibilities are being redistributed, and most critically, public trust is being re-earned one gesture at a time. The monarchy knows it cannot simply wait for the storm to pass. It must prove its relevance in a world that no longer tolerates opaque institutions built on secrecy. The age of blind reverence is over. Now, transparency, authenticity, and accountability are the new currency of legitimacy. Public opinion is divided, but undeniably louder than ever. Some believe the crown has run its course, an outdated symbol clinging to ceremony. Others argue that the institution can still serve as a cultural anchor if it evolves. And in this debate, Prince William stands at the center, not as a passive figure, but as a symbol of both crisis and opportunity. His transformation from heir apparent to a man unshackled by expectation has redefined the monarchy's image in the eyes of a new generation. People see his pain, his humanity, his choice to confront the truth. And in doing so, they see a monarchy capable of change. Discussions of reform are no longer theoretical. Advisors close to the royal family whisper of streamlined operations, reduced public expenditures, and a sharper focus on service rather than symbolism. There are talks of eliminating outdated protocols and replacing hollow ceremony with tangible impact. The institution, once proud of its distance, now teeters toward accessibility. And while King Charles attempts to steady the ship, many look to William, not as the next monarch, but as the architect of what the monarchy could become, should he ever choose to return. But that choice remains his alone. For now, William's role is undefined, and that ambiguity is powerful. It keeps the monarchy suspended in a moment of possibility. Will he return to the fold, reshaping it from within? Or will he remain apart, forcing the institution to evolve in his absence? Either way, the legacy of this era will be impossible to ignore. It will be remembered not for the ceremonies performed, but for the truths revealed. Not for the crowns worn, but for the courage it took to question who had the right to wear them. As the pages of history turn, only time will reveal the true impact of these revelations on the British monarchy. But one thing is certain: the crown, once untouchable, now stands exposed. And what happens next will determine not just the future of a royal family, but the future of a nation still learning how to separate tradition from truth. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.